Hello, I'm Layne Hartsell with the Korea Industry and Technology Times. I'm here with David Rovics, a indie singer-songwriter, and also a social philosopher from the United States. Thank you, David, for getting together again with me.
Well, thank you for calling me a social philosopher. I like that. I'll take it.
Well, David writes for Common Dreams, and you can look at some of his articles there dealing with U.S. history.
More often Counterpunch. I think I have appeared in Common Dreams maybe once, but yeah, Counterpunch more often, and Substack much more often than that.
And Substack. Yeah. And you can also find him on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about the shadow banning, deplatforming, and so on and so forth, all of these different terms, and we'll try to come to some definition for you, and also so that you can learn about from an expert here that's right out there on the front lines of how this situation is developing.
I develop expertise as I go, as the bands continue.
So first of all, I went to look on Bandcamp for you. I put in your name. You can see that you've been there or something, but you can't. But I can't find your actual songs. What's happening here? I mean, are the algorithms manipulating this?
I mean, I have no idea why it's happening. I don't think it has to do with algorithms. It just seems like they have either intentionally or accidentally, who knows, they have set things up on Bandcamp so that I don't come up in search. And it's confusing for a lot of people out there because when people think about search, they immediately think about Google. But I'm not talking about Google. I'm talking about Bandcamp. And, so you will find me on Bandcamp through Google. If you look for any song title or album title, plus the words Bandcamp, you'll come up with my stuff there. But if you go to Bandcamp and use their search window and look for me, you'll find only cover songs that other people have done of mine. And you'll find compilation albums I've contributed a song to. But otherwise, anything from my actual catalog, any of the hundreds of songs or dozens of albums from my actual catalog or my artist page are absent. They just don't show up. So it's very much like going to Spotify and looking for Neil Young. You'll find people who have covered his songs, and you'll find compilations he's contributed to, but none of his actual catalog because he had it removed from Spotify. But I never had my stuff removed. It's just been it hasn't been removed. It's still there, but it doesn't come up in search. So it's so I'm just calling it a shadow ban. There's a lot of different versions of shadow ban. A lot of times when people talk about a shadow ban, they're just talking about like some kind of thing being set in place, whatever. I'm not an IT expert at all. I have no idea what the terminology is here, but they set things up so that basically people don't get found or don't come up in the feed and stuff like that. And anybody who's like a journalist, especially like journalists who are used to seeing a certain amount of getting a certain amount of engagement with their articles on, then they keep some kind of journalistic outfit, like the people, there are people within the thing that'll keep track of that kind of stuff. So then when suddenly a social media platform changes its algorithms and suddenly Truth Out or Common Dreams or Counterpunch is getting literally like overnight half as much traffic as they used to get through those social media platforms or whichever one it is, it's very obvious when that's happening. But it's not obvious to anybody else. Usually it's not obvious to, you just stop seeing so many articles in your feed. You see more baby pictures. You don't notice necessarily that anything's changed. But if you're running one of those platforms, you sure notice. But in my case, it's not like I'm sure they may be doing that kind of algorithmic throttling of my presence online all over the place, and I've definitely noticed that in the past. But on various platforms, things change for the worse on YouTube and Facebook, and I don't get nearly as much engagement as I used to get. But this was years ago. But what's happening on Bandcamp is not about algorithms. It's about just it's an outright censorship. Like, you just look for my name, I'm not there. It's like Kafka.
I see. Yeah, I mean, I can remember going to one of your concerts back in, this has been 1990, maybe early 2000. Was it 2001? It was before 9/11. Anyway, I mean, this is before internet and everything that you could put up on there, and the room would be full, obviously. Roy Bourgeois might have been speaking at that one. I can't remember, but anyway, so when you've gone through decades of writing music, interacting with the public, traveling, troubadours kind of thing, then here come the digital platforms. I call them netarchical capitalism, after what Michelle Bowens at the P2P Foundation calls this. The capitalism gets a hold of the platforms, and then it can kind of throttle in, and I guess you throttle in on different things that it wants to get out there, maybe that make money. So, for example, what is it? Facebook would allow like these really emotionally reactive kind of platforms to get out or something. Yeah, and then but the others not. Okay,
Absolutely.
so I think people people kind of know what's going on, but they haven't heard it maybe this clear. So we're talking about YouTube, Facebook, Bandcamp, Spotify. What are some other ones? Is it TikTok or
I
something?
mean, well, yeah, TikTok. I mean, the thing is, well, they are all operating with different kinds of algorithms, and I mean, for one thing, I would say, when it comes to Spotify, Spotify, all the musicians, all the independent musicians in the world who used to make a living as musicians, may have issues with Spotify for their financial, their policies related to remuneration of musicians. But when it comes to their algorithms, I mean, Spotify is one of the few companies like that I think seems to be doing a great job as far as that goes. Not as far as their business model, or I mean that's horrible, but as far as their algorithm goes, it's pretty amazing. If you're looking for a particular kind of music, you'll get recommendations that you will like. I mean, and it's really quite impressive, I think. And a lot of people discover my music through Spotify's recommendations. Even though you don't make money from it per se, you at least do gain an audience from it. So in that sense, their algorithms are nice, I think. But YouTube's algorithms, on the other hand, basically, I mean, so Spotify's algorithm, like all these algorithms, they're at least, who knows how much political stuff is involved? Who knows? I mean, we can be sure. We can be absolutely sure, and also there's copious evidence in the Twitter files. If anybody's been following all of this stuff that Elon Musk has released about former Twitter management, I mean, we know how much actual overt, completely blatant government censorship is going on with people from from the government, very much, or former administration officials who have gotten hired for at Twitter, and that this kind of thing. People are very much involved with throttling, censoring, banning, blocking, shadow banning, all that kind of stuff, and we now know abundantly about their activities, involved with that kind of stuff. But basically, other than that, other than the political censorship, the algorithms are presumably about making money, right? So YouTube wants to keep you watching YouTube, because the longer you're watching, the more ads you see and the more money YouTube makes. So of course, they want to, so how do they do that? Well, they do it by whatever means will work. And those means, what they've discovered, what works, what keeps you glued to YouTube, is showing you more and more sensationalistic and controversial and objectionable material, and which includes lots of disinformation. And it has, the algorithms have nothing to do with education or what you're looking for, or something similar to what you were just looking for, or anything like it. It's just about keeping you watching. And with Facebook, it's the same. I mean, the conflict, it feeds on conflict. And my recent experiences, I wrote an essay, partly about my recent experiences with publishing another essay and then getting the reactions to it. And it was, I mean, just over the course of a day, what happened on Facebook just recently. I mean, first I shared the big hit song by Oliver Anthony, and then I shared my updated version of it, and then I shared an essay about that, and a couple other posts like to what happened today in history, for example, which I share frequently, and just to what to sort of illustrate how these algorithms work. Like with that day of different posts, 5 or 6 posts, the post about today in history got no engagement. Nobody saw it. Nobody ever sees those posts. There's nothing controversial about them. There's lots of people who used to see them and are interested in such posts. People who want to know about this stuff. Actually, for a lot of people, that's why they follow me on Facebook, is because they're interested in the today in history posts. But they'll never see them because they don't generate controversy. They don't go anywhere, and it's just a link to that takes them off of Facebook. So nobody sees those posts. I just do it for vanity. But then what's the post that day that they saw the most by far was me sharing Oliver Anthony's song. The posts that people liked the most were the essay I wrote about these things and my version of his song. People loved my updated version of it, but much more people saw my sharing of his song originally, because that's what generated controversy. And so people were just having arguments in the comments that generated hundreds of comments, and all these people arguing with each other about nitpicky little figuring out what this line means and how this one is supposedly some allusion to the Confederacy and whatever. I mean, it was madness. And I learned a lot from it, but it's in terms of the conversation, how different people view all kinds of things, right, left, in the modern sense, which is so warped. But the algorithm of the algorithms involved with the day, and which posts were seen and which weren't. That was very good illustration of just how this stuff works and why the social media platforms are just creating more conflict and dumbing us all down.
I see, in the case of Oliver's, he went back. Well, first of all, I'll tell you how I came about this. I saw your version first, listened to that, then I went to listen to his, and then I listened to his response, his recent response, where he said, "Look, you guys, this isn't about conservatism. I'm not trying to give, what is power or something to them." He said it's this. He's talking about the whole system. He explains it more eloquently than I do, but he did a pretty good job, I thought, to go back and to make it clear this is not. He doesn't want the antebellum South to come back.
Right?
He didn't say it that way, but yeah.
Right? No, and it's obvious too. And it's obvious when you listen to his music. I mean, one of the things that was interesting, I guess, is when at the very beginning, I suppose, when people were first hearing about his this particular song, I mean, when he released it, and a lot of people didn't know anything about the guy, and there wasn't. I guess it was. I guess at the beginning of the whole kerfuffle, it was hard to find a whole lot of other information about the guy, so people were just making assumptions based on this one song and how they were interpreting the lyrics. And it was very interesting and instructive, I think, for to note that so many left-wingers, so self-identified leftists and liberals in the United States, were freaking out about the song, while picking it apart and criticizing particular lines and calling him all kinds of names, like a right-winger and all this. Meanwhile, like he was getting millions and millions of people of all political backgrounds and persuasions and ethnicities and national origins and regions and everything else. Just a cross section of the working class of the world were responding with great enthusiasm to this song, but not the academic lefty, pick everything apart, settler colonialism, white people are worthless, and there's no, it can never be part of any kind of revolution. I mean, this is the now a prevalent perspective on the left, and it's been around since long before I was born, and I've been familiar with it for a long time, but it is now really prevalent. And what was basically a fringe Maoist sect, which I was actually deeply involved with as a young adult. I mean, I never joined the RCP, but I was deeply committed to reading the weekly paper from cover to cover. And I mean, I was very much, an adherent to the perspective, although never enough to quite join. But I'm familiar with this nonsense about the white working class being part of the, being the labor aristocracy, and you'll never be able to make any change with white people. I mean, I've heard about this stuff, and I've long ago rejected this kind of reasoning because it doesn't actually, it's ahistorical.
Well, certainly we have a modern major example. I mean, South Africa. If it weren't for people working together, it doesn't matter what color they are, South Africa would still be a nightmare, millions of people, more people killed, and so forth. But they had a combination of white people, black people, people from India, wherever. They had Cuban fighters there, so Cuban fighters were acting as a kind of backstop to this mass, well, I guess you'd call it genocide. There's 1 million people dead by, what, the 90s or something. I mean, that's an example. I hope the United States doesn't get to this point.
I mean, whether or not South Africa is the ideal example, there are just so many examples of people working together for common goals.
Yeah.
So we're in solidarity and having a goal, and then you make all sorts of compromises in the process of maybe not even that many, but it depends on the situation. You certainly, and generally you can't prioritize everything. You can't figure out how to solve every problem all at the same time. But when people come together in large numbers in an optimistic, well-organized social movement, they can accomplish great things, but they're not going to accomplish great things by just like yelling at each other on social media. That will accomplish way less than nothing.
Yeah, well, the example of South Africa is a real world, extremely serious situation, right? So you have centuries of mining, you have colonial exploitation, millions and millions dead, and then I'd say even though today with the scandals, the energy scandals, the issues, there are issues of people losing their land, which is serious. It's a lot better than, say, people being dragged off in the night and lynched like they were in the United States back, in the first half of the last century. But in South Africa, hundreds of thousands more than in the United States. The United States was like 5,000 or 7,000, which is bad enough. So yeah, I was trying to get at least a real world.
Yeah, the end of lynching and all that, definitely massive progress. But the fact that the white minority still owns the vast majority of the land is just an untenable situation, and it's also the same situation we have in the United States with this tiny little plutocracy owning most of the land and most of the wealth in the country, and this and it's not a. Of course, there's wealthy people of all ethnic backgrounds in both South Africa and the United States, but we both know who is the wealth. The concentrated wealth is not in the hands of people of color for the most part in either country. But and of course, there's lots of white people in poverty in I don't know about South Africa. I assume there's white poverty there. There's certainly a hell of a lot of white poverty in the United States, but it's this. There's just so much inequality in both countries, and South Africa is certainly extremely racialized inequality, and as well as in the United States to a very large extent. But it's this terrible inequality that is still existing. So we ended apartheid in South. They ended apartheid in South Africa, and we ended segregation in the United States. But we certainly haven't ended mass incarceration or institutional racism, and they certainly haven't ended those things in South Africa. Otherwise, black people would own they would own an amount of the land that's proportional to their population.
Right, right. Well, getting back to the algorithms and platform, this inequality that we're discussing here, we went into an actual real world example, right? South Africa compared to the U.S., but this inequality is really what's being it's like a bonfire with these algorithms all over the place, But so
it is.
Yeah, can you
And
say
then
more?
also, I mean, another thing is, I mean, for people who aren't familiar with some of the details in, in many other parts of the world, I mean, and it's been well documented, and one of the people who's documented it is Reza, the Filipino woman who won the Nobel recently, the Filipino
Maria,
journalist who
Maria
won the
Ressa,
Nobel, whose name is
Maria Ressa,
escaping me. Starts with an
Maria Ressa.
R, right? Yeah, but that's right. That's right. Yeah, I think so. That's right. And she was talking about how these algorithms have literally caused massacres. Because rumors are just allowed to spread that nobody is checking on, and it's all getting shared. I mean, but this is the nature of these platforms, and so I mean, you can never have enough people doing doing control, doing, checking out posts that are coming in.
Hey guys.
It's yeah, we got the kids visiting. Oh, we're maybe the internet's gonna die on us too. It's working over here, so it should be working. Maybe restart.
So Maria Ressa is
But
the
yeah,
Filipino
Maria Reza. Yeah,
American CEO of Rappler. If people are wondering what we're talking about, Rappler is the media. The okay, so
yeah.
so take
She
go ahead.
Mhm. Yeah, and she was talking about how, I mean, this is, in many cases, and there's been cases in many different countries where just through complete lack of oversight on the part of Facebook, or even if they had like one person who spoke Urdu or whatever it was, I mean, just nobody to really deal with, massive populations of people who are, of course, like in every other language, they're spreading all kinds of disinformation that in English, at least, Facebook is doing some kind of job at monitoring and controlling and censoring, but in other languages they're just doing none of that, and then of course even when they are doing the control of propaganda or disinformation that's coming out, it doesn't work because they're kind of all those people in safety and are working against the basic way that the algorithm functions, which is to feed on conflict and sensationalism and that's what they do, and you can see that all the time, and including just a few days ago with my experiences with responses to what I've written about this song.
David, let me ask you about this thing. You mentioned it feeds on conflict, which it does. But let me say, when I look at, I haven't read the studies, of course. I'd have to look at what the researchers are saying. But what I see happening is, well, there should be we should focus on certain conflicts. Climate change, nuclear weapons, war in Ukraine, war in Taiwan. That's on, but it doesn't focus on these. It's
No,
not
not
focused
those
on
kinds of
the actual
conflicts. No,
conflicts. So it's the
not
content.
politics.
Right,
Conflict between users.
right.
Conflict between users is just, if something generates comments, and comments again, and then another comment on that comment and that kind of thing, more and more engagement, then that makes it good. But what generates that kind of engagement most of the time seems to be people having arguments with each other. There's just less that people have to say about something when they all just appreciate it. Apparently, I don't know how, but what goes into these, figuring these things out, but that's how it is. So the one that's generating conflict, that's what, everybody who follows me on Facebook, if they see anything in their feed, if there's something that's generating a lot of conflict, they're going to see that post and other things that get prioritized in the algorithms. Like, I mean, if anybody ever wonders, as people do, why people like me take pictures of ourselves so often, it has nothing to do with any desire to take a picture of myself. I mean, I would never take pictures of myself, whatever, for whatever reason. It just never occurs to me, except that, if you're in an airport and you take a picture of yourself, that's going to be the best tour promotion that you've done for the whole time you've been trying to promote your tour. That's what Facebook wants, is that picture of yourself in the airport, and they're going to promote that. But you wait until the next day and you're not in the airport anymore, that nobody's going to see that. They like certain kinds of things, anything mentioning somebody, a baby being born or a wedding or somebody, a relative dying, those always make it way end conflict. So you always get to know what, the baby, if somebody's had a baby and if somebody's having an argument.
There's one thing I noticed that also it looks like to me is that there's this kind of, human beings and even animals do this. There's a kind of tribute that's paid by, you drop names of the person that you want to be seen by, or that it could be legitimate, like you actually respect somebody. But they'll throw around names of some techno-utopian CEO, and they're trying to get recognized by this person, he or she. But what this does, it also kind of gets this kind of algorithmic tribute paying up the ladder. Have you seen? Yeah, I don't know what you call it, but
no, I don't think I'm familiar with this phenomenon.
Yeah. So you'll see people, they'll be dropping, the hashtag, and then it'll go out, and if it has a certain person's name in it, then that will go out, this person's going to save us free speech, and so forth, which is look, anyone who's for corporate free speech is not for free speech. This is the antithesis
of free expensive speech. Yeah, that's right. I think, this whole debate around free speech and censorship, it so often is missing the point of who controls, who's calling the shots, who has the money, who's telling the reporters what to write about, or what not to write about. It's and then the algorithms, how do they factor into all this stuff? It's just it doesn't even make any sense to just talk about it as a free speech versus censorship question, because it's so much more than that. But
right.
And I think we should be talking about all the money, and we should be talking about the algorithms a lot, but we should not be talking about censorship. I think it's pretty evident that free speech is an overwhelmingly positive thing in a society. But what's also really overwhelmingly negative are these conflict algorithms and spreading disinformation, and the way that they work, and that it's terrifying. It's dangerous.
That's right. The fundamental rights that a person would have would be, first of all, the right to life, which a lot of people forget. So they go on right to liberty. We want liberty, but I
have to take 1 minute off. Sorry, I'll be right back.
Yep. Yeah, we'll cut. Yep.
That's our dinner. Thank you. Okay, we can eat soon, but you go up. You can go back to the room, and I'll come get you in a minute. Okay. Sorry, we got dinner delivered, so
that was really adorable. It'd be nice to keep it in here, then you could get millions of followers. But anyway, we'll cut it out. What I was saying is that, of course, life and liberty. Life is fundamental, and then comes liberties and equalities and so forth. But the thing about free speech and the algorithms and all that, free speech is one of the core, fundamental, rock, granite, solid needs that are necessary to have a good society. I don't know how I could emphasize it more. Freedom of thought, freedom of speech. Not that you're going to go out and say, you're going to hurt. You can't. There's going to be some boundaries on free speech, but it should be as wide as possible. Even if they hurt your feelings, people call me a name or something, whatever, it's just tolerated. You can't. So what we're talking about here is this is controlled, right? Corporate platforms.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is absolutely a handful of massive corporations controlling the basic ways that people communicate with each other in any kind of group formation online. Globally, it's absolutely terrifying. And like looking back I think, basically between like 1995 and 2005 or so, it was actually the golden age of the internet. And it was an amazing time, actually, despite the extremely slow speeds of everything, and the very limited graphics and whatever. I mean, it was a way that you could actually effectively organize. And there's, I think, a reason why some of the most effective organizing around the global justice movement and the anti-war movement all took place during those years. There's also other reasons, of course, very important ones like 9/11 and the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan and all that. So I'm not at all trying to say, that is irrelevant in the least. But the fact that the effective response to those things, or at least more effective response to what was happening, that was going on around those movements that were happening, which, despite the fact that the anti-war movement and the global justice movement of those periods of the late 90s and early noughties, they received virtually no media attention, which is hard for people to imagine today. Anybody who was born around, in the 80s and became an adult, and in the 21st century, would really have no idea that prior to their adulthood, like say, after 2005 with Camp Casey and with Occupy Wall Street and with so many other things, Black Lives Matter, since then, which have received blanket wall-to-wall media coverage from both the liberal and conservative media, for each of them pushing their own, polarized agenda, but both of them wanting to cover things like the protests in 2020 and Occupy Wall Street in 2011 and Camp Casey in 2005. For whatever reason, they started covering this stuff. But before that, they never covered it, but we still had the biggest and most well-organized movements of that time. We still managed to get 500,000 people, or probably much more than that, in New York City in February 2003. That we still got 60,000 people to come to Seattle in '99 and all commit civil disobedience and shut down the WTO meetings. I mean, that kind of stuff was going on, and that has not been happening since Facebook in the United States. Well, there's movements since then have been sometimes large, but very, very media driven. And, people don't organize in the sense that they used to, in terms of like organizing text mobs and getting people's information, because of this insane kind of obsession with security culture and anonymity. And it's just all been a gift to the intelligence agencies. So the social media, the anonymity, the security culture, all of it. It's been a disaster.
Yeah, I hear you. You're right. Well, let's talk about Seattle, right? So you don't have these massive, highly sophisticated algorithms that are they're getting ready to go exponential with AI, but that's another issue. At Seattle, you were there. I
That's
think.
going to be terrifying. When AI, I was not in Seattle. I was in Germany at the time, singing at an anti-nuke protest for 5,000 people. I could have been singing for much bigger crowds.
That's okay. We'll forgive you.
Love brought me to Germany, but I made myself useful as soon as I got there. Plugged into the anti-nuke movement. But yeah, I was not in Seattle.
Okay, so for Seattle, indie media came about. Massive development in social development. We want to talk about that just briefly.
Yeah, I mean, indie media was one of the main ways that people organized and got the word out about different things that were happening. And it was, before social media, it was, I don't know how popular it was, but it was popular in the scene where it mattered, and among people who were involved with the global justice movement and were trying to, find out what was happening and where it was happening and how they could be a part of it and all that. I mean, you largely found all that kind of stuff out from the local indie media site. And so what would happen back then was, even after the sort of heyday of indie media was over, I guess, it would still continue to be the case that if there was a big protest happening in a particular town, even if the indie media collective or site was not especially active under normal circumstances, when there was an event happening in the town, then people would start getting mobilized and be, using the site much more, and it would become a main source for information about what was happening in that town coming up. So it was very, I just try to not overly romanticized indie media because it had its pros and cons, and it wasn't as popular as Facebook or anything like that. But it was a very effective organizing tool among many others, and that were effective organizing tools that were part of the sort of decentralized golden age of the internet.
And then came, social media, 2006. I have a few directions to go as I've been talking to you. And let me let you choose. Let me put these out there. There's Neil Young with Spotify, and then there's with Twitter with the takeover by Musk and revealing the inner workings of that. There's Shoshana Zuboff at Harvard, a philosopher, a researcher that's done a lot of good work on surveillance, which is what we're talking about, right?
I read that book.
You got it?
I read her very excellent book, Surveillance Capitalism. I read it a few months ago.
You want to go in that direction with Zuboff?
Well, I think the Spotify, that my choice among those would be the Spotify. I have a lot to say about all of that, but particularly Spotify and Neil Young, I think is a really great sort of example of what we're talking about, or one more sort of angle of it. The whole Joe Rogan thing. It was here's another guy that so many people have so many opinions about who have never watched any of his broadcasts. And I'm constantly running into that. And this is a thing with like people who have so many opinions on Trump and they've never watched one of his speeches in its entirety from beginning to end. And yet he was the president for 4 years. But people just, they only do the little clips, the little sound bites that NPR runs or something, and they do this. It's the same with Joe Rogan. So all they knew about Joe Rogan was like he interviewed this one COVID skeptic, doctor, and they don't know anything about all the other people he interviewed, that most of whom had nothing to do with politics or of any kind, But I'm sure Neil Young didn't watch Joe Rogan either, but he heard that he had interviewed the wrong guy, and then he's, I guess, all into the whole times that we're in, and thought, well, then it's either him or Rogan on Spotify platform. But to me, and he got his stuff all taken down from Spotify, But to me, the thing that bothers me about Spotify and Joe Rogan is the $100 million that Spotify paid Joe Rogan to be on Spotify, because I don't have a problem with Joe Rogan or his podcast or what guests he wants to have on his podcast, or the fact that he has an extremely popular podcast. I have a problem with Spotify, which should be sending artists money, giving that 100 million of that money that should be going to the artists on the platform to Joe Rogan. That's my problem with it, is the money involved.
So for people that are listening, Joe Rogan, because I'm in Asia, right? So Joe Rogan is a podcaster that has a famous podcast, but he talks about like people fighting in cages, and they have like this martial arts kind of thing going on. And he had made some racist comments about they had gone to a movie in a predominantly black neighborhood, and he called it Africa. It's pretty bad stuff. But anyway, this all came out with Neil Young had then done as you said. So what happened? So Spotify is taking money, or it's a massive corporation, I guess, and it pays back to people that are using the platform. But it was basically, it took all the money together and just goes for a big name for their product, right? And then regular artists don't get a lot, because Rogan's not a musician; he's a podcaster or a YouTube.
Yeah, so Spotify started out as a streaming platform for music, and then in the past few years they expanded very sort of aggressively into the podcast realm, and invested billions in their whole podcast infrastructure. And but originally a music streaming platform, and the idea, and they've been intent for years now on basically dominating the global music streaming scene, and they've done a very good job of that. And they, something like 70% of music streamed in the world is streamed on Spotify, something like that. It's huge. It's but the very much the dominant global music streaming platform these days, and it's also really well designed. But they so they made a deal with the big three global record labels that to give their to give them a bigger cut of the streaming royalties than the independent musicians get, in order to get the big labels on board, and that really helped Spotify get much more popular when they were able to offer basically all the world's both major label and independent music for free streaming, and so that's what they did in 2013. They offered everything for free, and that's when me and millions of other musicians basically overnight stopped selling CDs. They didn't warn us, by the way, you're not going to sell any merch after tomorrow, but that's how it went for lots of people, including me. And then what Spotify later got into, and so they pay royalties, but they pay as little as they need to. Oftentimes, as far as I can tell, paying whatever the government in question says is the minimum that artists need to get paid for a stream. And I think the Treasury Department in the U.S. sets that. And that has a lot to do with how much money we get or don't get, is those, because the companies themselves very rarely pay much, and Spotify has really sort of set the standard by paying really badly. And so other companies like Apple and Google that used to pay much better than Spotify have felt the the need or whatever to go down in what they're paying to compete with Spotify. So, like this race to the bottom kind of thing. But then when they got into podcasting, in order to get, popular, they decided to take what was already, I think, one of the most popular podcasters, Joe Rogan, and then sign him on to have an exclusive contract with Spotify. So the normal thing with podcasts is you can get the podcast that you're into on any podcasting distributor and any platform, and it's just going to be there, and that's how they tend to be. That's what people usually think of when they think of a podcast, but that's changing, and now podcasts can be exclusively on a particular platform. So if you want to hear a podcast of Joe Rogan's, the only place to do that is on Spotify. So that's and that helps Spotify expand their whole empire, and they paid him $100 million in the process.
But yeah, well, aside from all of this kind of thing, like take someone like Joe Rogan and this kind of content, the fighting, this kind of I would call it what is it, machismo, or just always, it's like always kind of like an aggressive front. Some of the racism.
You haven't watched him, huh? He's a gentle, he's a chill guy, and he just
Okay.
he has casual conversations with people that last for hours, and sometimes they'll smoke a joint while they're talking. But I believe he is an athlete, right? I mean, that's his background, is like wrestling and whatever. I don't know. And he is maybe comedy too. I have no idea. I don't watch much, but I've watched enough just to see that he interviews a lot of athletes, a lot of actors and comedians, and it's a very very enjoyable, relaxed style of interview that's almost more like just like having a little conversation with your friends that happens to get filmed, much more than sort of a formal interview. So it's you can see why people like it.
Has he ever had a Native American on there? I did look a little bit at what was going on in the content, and it seems like it's like these fighting, this kind of militaristic kind of position. Has Navy SEALs on, has, then there's the comments about Native African Americans and so on and so forth. It just seemed like, what I was getting at, I mean, this is evidence. I was getting at what would be causing so many people to be so interested in this, that this is the top YouTube channel. It's never had a Native
the top podcast
or podcast.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know anything about whether he's had a Native American on his show before. But I mean, why is it so popular? I think I don't know because he was really famous in the first place, and then he got into podcasting. I think he might have gotten into it before a lot of other people did. He might have been partly the ground floor phenomenon. I have no idea how he got to be that popular.
He's talented.
But I never really understand. I mean, yeah, he is talented, and that's the case. I'd say with in the music business, I would say that pretty much all of the pop stars are highly talented, and there are usually really good business people too. But then at the same time, there's so many talented artists who don't become pop stars because there's only room for a very few. It's not like anybody who has the talent becomes a pop star. It's a chosen little group of people that is often related to other pop stars or literally related in blood, like their parents are directors, in Hollywood, that kind of thing. I mean, it's a very, very, I don't know, what's the word, the negative word. I'm trying to find the negative word, not incestuous. It's that's a negative too. But I mean, it's also it also makes sense because, a lot of people, if you're raised by a school teacher, you often become a school teacher. That's very common, but it's also the case that if your parents are pop stars, you're much more likely to become a pop star.
Yeah, it's the cultural conditions that are around you. And I didn't want to just pick out one person and say like Rogan. What I was getting at is that even if you just remove the person out of the situation, he's a human being. But what I'm talking about is this kind of wave of the interest in, say, the pandemic is virtually a hoax. The UFC fighting, the lionization of Navy SEALs, hero worship, on and on and on. How this has become, and it's quite extreme right wing. It's not like, Timothy Leary comes to mind from the '60s. This kind of stuff is really kind of out there kind of stuff, or maybe Johnny Depp.
The stuff out there stuff is what gets promoted consistently by the algorithms, and so it's not surprising that it becomes so popular because it gets promoted by these algorithms as well. But of course, people. I mean, I again would not characterize Joe Rogan in the ways that when his show, he's not a right winger. I mean, his shows are not like that. He's not Rush Limbaugh at all. I mean, Rush Limbaugh was a right winger. Glenn Beck is a right winger. I mean, they're really obviously right wingers, and they say overtly right wing, things. Rogan doesn't do that, as far as from what I've heard. I mean, I have only heard a little bit of his stuff, but
I've only seen. I would say that hero worship of corporate tyranny is far beyond Glenn Beck or anything Rush Limbaugh did. I mean, they have a populist, nationalist kind of, that's fascism. But anyway, this thing looks like to me, I mean, you have massive corporations owning free speech. That's so ultra right wing.
Oh yeah.
So anyway,
that's another kind of. I mean, that's a meta right wing. I mean, beyond the what we think of as the right left thing when in American politics or something like that. I mean, that's capitalism, and it's a massive problem, and it leads towards fascism, and it leads towards things like censorship and these terrible crazy algorithms, and of course AI taking over the world and everybody becoming unemployed, a little flesh tools for the robots or whatever's coming.
Right. Well, yeah. Before, I don't want to sound like I don't want to sound like I'm just looking at one person in these cases because it's a system. But you listen to, say, Glenn Beck. You get these algorithms bringing that stuff all the time. If I search on something about U.S. politics and this comes up, or red state, blue state, so I listen to it. Listen to somebody like Glenn Beck if he doesn't make some kind of outlandish statement, or listen to Rush Limbaugh back in decades ago. You can kind of hear. There is a kind of care of the working person, the regular person, even if it's in service of some other kind of, you know, GOP platform, and yeah, that is quite fascist. But you can at least hear some of the people in it. Well, let me try to get to the root of it. Whether it's I don't know, somebody on the left wing or somebody in the um, even the KKK kind of stuff. What is it, David Duke, or right wing, and with some of the people that we mentioned, there is a core there, and it is we're speaking for the common person, and therefore we're good. And then comes all this kind of conspiracy, all this stuff kind of just mounting up on it. I think this is kind of where their algorithms are jumping in and getting into this whole, I guess, froth on top. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's the people are just individual people.
Well, I mean, the algorithms love all that, and anything like conspiracy theories and or yeah, any alternative explanations to things that people are familiar with. Yeah, that stuff gets pushed way up into the algorithms, and then of course people who are trying to become popular are very well aware of that, and so they just do what people like Alex Jones has done most of his career, and just like make stuff up, completely out of whole cloth, and then it becomes somehow or another, really, popular ideas of what is actually happening. People don't want to accept reality, and so they're interested in the alternative explanations of reality. And
I noticed back, I think I posted something on Facebook. I'm not on there very much, but all of a sudden, you get all this information about aliens have shown up on I guess it's the algorithms too. Like I searched something.
They had congressional hearings recently.
Right.
In like a couple of weeks ago, there were congressional hearings where they were interviewing military people who were attesting to having seen aliens and alien technology and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, that got a lot of people's attention.
Okay, so that was algorithms and the same kind of thing. There aren't any aliens.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, it was congressional hearings that were going on in Washington, D.C. with senators and all that, and the media, so that they got conventional media attention, and anything that gets conventional media attention gets social media attention. In fact, most of what is talked about on social media is stuff that people watched on TV. I can't remember where I read that. Maybe it was Shoshana.
What I hear in that is that, wait a minute, so what has happened? There's this like hyper concentrated core of information that's just being amplified by these algorithms, and other people looking in that say aren't trained in critical thinking, which every adult should be, because that's a basic responsibility. They don't recognize that this is just the same concentrated core that's just being amplified out and then added on to. Right?
Yeah. And I mean, there are societies where I think a much larger proportion of society is capable of critical thought, and I see this kind of thing taking root in those societies far less than in the United States. I mean, there's such a different scene in the United States compared to like Denmark, for example. And I think I think it's really helpful if you're from a country that speaks a very minor language, because then if most of your communication is in, say, Danish, then that most of the time, if anybody's talking about something really wacky, they're probably doing it in English, and then you pretty much right away they're not Danish. And so it helps, I think, for the Danes to keep a kind of a firewall between reality and the wacky stuff people talk about in English on the internet. I think that is probably a phenomenon.
I think maybe you should do stand-up, David, like Jimmy Dore and some of these guys.
Every once in a while, I mean, I have managed to do, like, I got a pretty good routine. I mean, it's nothing I've actually worked out, but when I'm on a good night, doing a gig, I'll start talking about the differences between different countries in Europe in terms of how people cross streets, and that, I mean, that can be, there's a lot of good content to be mined, and that whole reality between the absolute law-abiding sort of the way it is in Germany, where people always wait at the crosswalk and then walk and it says to walk and don't walk before it says to walk, even if there's no traffic. Whereas in England, people will just leap into traffic. Just to save like 1 second in their time, they'll just like jaywalk and risk car accidents and risk their own death and risk the deaths of their children and any unsuspecting Germans that happen to be standing around who will follow them into the street, because they assume the light must have changed, because why else would somebody walk into the street? I cannot tell you the number of German tourists who I have seen almost get killed in London because they followed a British person, across the street because they thought the light had changed. But no, this crazy Londoner was just diving into traffic. That's usually what they do. I mean, they put up barriers all over London, 100 years ago to try to prevent all these Londoners from leaping into traffic and killing themselves. They had to put up metal barriers, like all of a massive program all over the country, putting up these metal barriers. Other countries don't need those. They just the light telling them not to walk is enough, and they don't walk until the light says walk. And they have they care about their children, and so they want the children to know how to cross streets because cars are dangerous, and they want their children to understand that and understand that you deal with that reality by doing what the traffic light tells you to do and not doing what it doesn't tell you. That's a big, first step. But, the British people just can't manage to do that, even with all the barriers it's really quite a contrast. And then the British people think the Germans are robots, and the Germans think the Brits are suicidal maniacs. And I much actually would go with the German perspective, because I used to think the Germans seemed like a bunch of robots until I actually spent time in Germany, and then after a few days I realized, oh my gosh, this is totally sane. Like, why doesn't everybody just obey traffic laws? I mean, obeying other laws, that's maybe depending on the law, but traffic laws, obeying them actually makes sense. If everybody obeys them, people don't die as nearly as much. It's good. Traffic laws are good. Right of way, that kind of stuff. People knowing that, like stay on the right if you're going slower, pass on the left. Like in Germany, that's how it always is. In England, it's like completely random. In the United States, I mean, right, left, you'd never know who's supposed to be going faster.
Speaking with David Rovics here on algorithms and cancellations, cancel culture, deplatforming, shadow banning, and all that. And then he provided.
We didn't even get into cancel culture today. I mean, that's a whole other phenomenon. We talked about that before, though. But yeah, I mean, this whole because it's like it's the DIY form of censorship. It's like that's when the corporations aren't doing it, but just brainwashed followers of whoever.
And also, I want to thank David for his stand-up comedy on the tension between security and freedom, whether we have suicidal maniacs or we have just robots crossing streets. Maybe we'll see a YouTube or a song about that. David, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Writer, musician David Rovics. Thanks.